The R5 is 1,200, 400.
102,000.
102,400.
Like, both of you are terrible at it.
Okay. 102.
Hey guys, welcome back to OMS TV. Today we're out here in the beautiful Babylonstoren and we have the Sony Alpha A7S III and we also have the Canon EOS R5.
Now these were the biggest releases of the year. Many people were waiting for them, and today we'll be putting them head to head to see which one is right for you. Which in today's sort of date.
Today's date. Okay, so to kick it off, let's just yank the sheet off the elephant in the room here. Stills performance. And I'll say it right off the bat, the R5 has it absolutely whipped in stills performance.
Yeah, and the biggest reason for that, 45 megapixels.
Unfortunately, the Sony A7S is just not geared for that level of performance. It's a 12 megapixel sensor. It is not going to give you the quality that the R5 gives you in stills. And you can see that from the pictures that we're popping up right now. On the A7S over here, you have a maximum burst of 10 frames per second.
On the R5, you've got 12 mechanical, and if you switch to electronic mode, you can do up to 20.
Again, it's a big difference. It really kind of speaks to where these two cameras were aimed by the manufacturers, and I think that's going to be a very important thing to remember as we run through this entire video.
Jumping to autofocus points, 1053, so quite a big amount of autofocus points. Again, on the photography side, that's going to be quite a big help.
Yeah, so the Sony is no slouch by any means. So you're looking at about 759 autofocus points on the A7S III.
So still very respectable.
That is incredible. Like a year ago, that would have been class leading. But unfortunately, Canon came out with that whole new autofocus system that they're pushing. It is incredible, and we'll touch on that later, how it actually performs.
Yes.
Suffice it to say, it makes a difference.
ISO performance, 1,200, 400. $102,400. So on the R5, we've got a maximum ISO of 102,400.
Yeah, and looking at the Sony, your ISO can be bumped all the way up to 409,600, which is a very respectable ISO range on a camera like this. It really speaks to the proposed low light performance out of these units.
That's correct.
In previous videos, when we did a A7S III review, we saw how the Sony performs in low light, and it's a beast.
And we know the megapixels make a big help on that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's definitely where that low megapixels come into play.
So from my point of view, I'm super familiar with Canon, and it definitely has all the buttons in the right places as per usual. Something that Canon had to do is obviously put in the new CF Express slots, which is the Type B, seeing that we know that the Sony takes a different one.
Correct, yeah. So Sony uses a new CF Express card slot, the Type A, and for the time being, you can only actually buy that from Sony. And it feels like it kind of ties me in and forces me to buy a specific brand that I don't necessarily want to. But that is the situation, that's what we've got.
So how'd the Sony feel for you? Did it feel like a Sony? It's got the new menu system, that's right?
Absolutely, and that is probably the biggest change on this unit. Everything else is exactly as you expect it to be. All the buttons, the toggles, but that new menu system, oh. Very recently, we shot a review on the Sony A7C, and that still has the old menu. I don't know which sequence you guys are watching this video in, but that review was actually shot yesterday. And going from that menu system to this menu system,
much faster, right?
Miles apart. It feels like a Canon or a Nikon or a Fuji menu.
It's much more familiar.
Absolutely. It's something that I picked up and immediately I was like, okay, great. Like, this is how it works. This is where all the settings are. I really like it. It works amazing.
From a shooting perspective, we have no complaints of these two bodies.
Yeah, in terms of the actual performance when you're shooting and how they handle and all of that, they're both excellent. They really are both great. But in terms of stills performance, there is a big gap here with the output quality. There is no world in which 12 megapixels is going to compete against 45 megapixels.
And we do see that, as we said earlier, when you punch into the photos.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay.
Clap it.
Even more. Boy.
Okay. So in terms of the autofocus performance on the A7S III, if this camera came out at the beginning of the year, it would have been the best autofocusing system of 2020. But it didn't. And Canon came out and...
I don't think it's the amount of autofocus points. It's a couple of things. It's going to be the new dual pixel AF version 2 and also the deep learning algorithm. And we've seen that on the 1DX3 as well.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be honest, this kills it completely. This is phenomenal. Coming from a more DSLR style of shooting where you have to move the little point around to get it in shot, there's no worries. Literally just pointing it at all of these birds we shot today and it locked on their eyes. Even though the eyes were so small in the frame, it just kept it in focus. There was almost no chance of missing a shot.
Yeah.
And it makes it so easy.
If you guys look back, I did a review on the R6 and that has the same autofocus system.
Correct, yeah.
And it absolutely blew my mind. And today, shooting with that as well, exactly the same experience. It's not detracting from what Sony did over here. This autofocus system is intelligent. It picks out faces, it picks out eyes in frames, all of that really well, just not as good as the R5.
Yeah, even when we were shooting the birds and it wasn't picking up the faces, it actually kept their body in focus as well.
Everybody needs to step up their game now because Canon really has set a new bar. This does animal eye autofocus, but mostly for domestic animals. I once got it to automatically detect a face and an eye on a donkey, and that was it. Again, it's not saying that this system is bad. It has now just become a previous generation.
Especially when you compare it to this bad boy.
Only when you compare it to Canon's new cameras. Now, I found very much the same autofocus disparity when we were shooting video with them.
Both of these models has got touchscreen. From my side, the touchscreen on the Canon was extremely responsive and it really kept and tracked the autofocus very well in video mode.
Very much the same is true for the Sony system. It also has the animal eye tracking or the human eye tracking autofocus, which we've discussed, and it has the continuous tracking autofocus in video mode, exactly as the R5 does. But throughout the day of shooting it, it just felt that the R5 had the edge in terms of autofocus. Every single time that we shot something where we had to track something, where it had to lock onto a subject, and even when you were panning around, anything like that, the R5 felt like the autofocus point stuck onto wherever you placed it, and it did not move. The Sony to me felt a little bit more fiddly. I don't want to say it like that because it makes it sound like the Sony's autofocus system is bad.
It's not at all.
It's not. It is incredibly good. It's just that when you use them like this, right next to each other, the R5 is that little step above. Thought I was gonna get run over.
Nothing.
Yo.
Our producer here will be like,
Admittedly, neither of us said anything about the bucky coming up behind her. We just walked over there, took cash.
So let's talk about the main reason why most people probably clicked on this video, and that's going to be the video performance of these two.
They're very similar in terms of what they can produce.
Yeah, this you can shoot 8K 30 frames in RAW, 4K 120.
That is big. I mean, 8K video, it's not something that we've really ever seen in this type of camera. It might not be the most practical format to shoot in, but at the end of the day, it's very, very impressive that it can do it. In terms of 4K video, they're actually very, very similar. So both units will shoot 4K at a maximum frame rate of 120, but realistically, you're going to be using it at 4K 60. And there they really perform almost identical, like really, really, really close to each other. The 4K 120 on the R5 right now is baked in 120. So when you do play it back, you're always going to play it back in slow mode.
And that gives you some limitations for the more professional cinema guys.
On the A7S, that 4K 120 is completely freeform and you can edit it and scale it as you see fit, which is an advantage to the Sony in that field.
Also in terms of output, the Sony also has a slight advantage, right?
Absolutely. The Sony outputs, or at least can output, a maximum of a 16-bit RAW 4K file. It's so insane that right now, no external recorder can actually accept a 16-bit file. For right now, if you output the maximum uncompressed RAW footage from this unit into, say, an Atomos Ninja V, it will actually downscale it to 14-bit. It's a big advantage that the Sony holds there.
Something we can say about the R5 as well, seeing that the 4K is downsampled, that it is a slight sharper image when you compare it to the Sony.
On that point, the Sony A7S III has a native 4K sensor. And what that means is that the 4K, as you shoot it on the frame, feeds exactly like that onto your memory card or out through your HDMI port. And yes, that does have the disadvantage that realistically it might not be as sharp as downsampled footage, because I mean that downsamples from a 45 megapixel sensor. That's a big difference. But the advantage that you do have here is low light performance in video. And we know that this thing is an absolute low light monster in video. Just go watch our review of this thing. Destroys it. It's absolutely incredible.
So when shooting in 4K on the Canon R5, it will offer DCI 4K, while the Sony only offers you UHD 4K. Codec wise, both similar, H.265, so nothing different there, and also both offer log profiles.
Yeah, but when it comes to the log, there is something that we have to note, and this is something that we know for a fact. It's proven, it's tested. Sony's S-Log 3 does have a distinct advantage over C-Log. It's flatter, and that offers a little bit more dynamic range when you compare the two. And that also plays to, again, the megapixel difference. You have bigger photo sites on the Sony unit, and that is going to play to the advantages of S-Log 3 and give you that increased dynamic range. Now, the other thing that we have to mention here is that both cameras have in-body stabilization. Now, for the shooting today, both the lenses we used also have lens stabilization, but the Canon, I feel, has a distinct advantage here.
Yeah, so both 24-105 lenses shooting at f4, and like you said, stabilized. But we do feel that the Canon offers smoother stabilization.
Absolutely.
Especially when you look at real-world testing that we did, and we were shooting handheld with no gimbals.
Yeah, and this is a bit of a complaint that's been coming up with the Sony units over the last year or so, where their stabilization system has been falling a little bit behind some of the competition. Now again, in a lot of instances where you are going to shoot with these units, you might have gimbals, and that'll make this in-body stabilization a bit of a non-issue. But it is still important to note, in these situations, the Canon does hold a bit of an advantage.
And now?
Do we have to redo it?
So next up, we're going to talk about what we don't like about these units. Now for me, shooting with the R5 today, it's going to be a couple of things. Unfortunately, the R5 still offers a recording limitation of 29 minutes. As we know, cameras of today, I think, should remove that limitation completely. Next is going to be the modal. I personally prefer the traditional modal as per the Sony and the older Canon units. That's something that you can get used to. I actually, to be honest, got used to it today. Next up, micro HDMI port. So that is going to limit you a little bit in terms of output potential. What do you think about the Sony?
Yeah, so on the Sony, I actually have very few complaints. I think it's a very well-rounded unit. The LCD screen is a bit of a drawback. In isolation, I think it's perfect. But today I saw it right next to the LCD on that R5. Though they both claim to be more or less the same size, that definitely has more real estate on it. This has a lot of wasted space on the one side. It feels a little bit more cramped. The other thing I don't like, which we have mentioned in the past, is the CF Express Type A cards. I'm not a big fan of it, but at the same time, I am impressed by the fact that these card slots can take that and SD cards. I think that's kind of cool, and it's kind of a nice to have. But that's pretty much my only complaints on this unit. Like an idiot, I'm also like looking where Andre's looking.
There's an overheating elephant! So before we get roasted in the comments below, let's address the other elephant in the room.
And it's a big one. It is an absolute massive one, and that is Canon's little bit of a notorious overheating problem. Looking back at our previous review on the Canon EOS R6, we actually encountered quite a severe overheating problem on that unit. Now, Canon does say that they fixed it and they've improved it quite a bit, and there's been one or two firmware updates that have spoken to that exact problem. And I will just say today, shooting out here, bright sunlight, it's a pretty hot day, it's about 25, 26 degrees Celsius outside. That thing gave no issues.
No issues, no warning, no problems, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely nothing. It ran perfectly smooth. Again, we should say that we weren't recording continuously while the camera was in direct sunlight.
It was more clip-based.
Yeah, a couple of minutes here, a couple of minutes there. But previously, in testing these units, pre-firmware update, even that type of shooting caused them to overheat. And I think that is something important to note here. And it is something that you're going to carry forward with these units. The mere fact that when they did come out, there was this overheating problem. It does cause me to not trust the R5 and the R6 system as much as I probably can. I personally tested this R5 just after I did the initial firmware update on it. And I had it in my office and I switched it on and it ran for an hour, obviously in 29-minute intervals. The camera didn't give any warnings, nothing like that. And I don't think it's a concern anymore. I think it's spoken to and it's addressed, but it's just
Always in the back of your head, right?
Yeah, like I just struggle to trust it as much as I do the Sony.
And also the obvious elephant in the room. Kan nie weer elephant sê nie, sorry.
What were you going to say? Now, in terms of things that we liked about these units, things that really stood out, for me, it's simple. First off, it's S-Log3. You can get so much dynamic range out of it. The second thing is going to be this menu system. I know it's not necessarily better than what everyone else is doing, but it's so much better than any other Sony camera out there that I have to mention it. It's incredible. I love it. Great job, Sony. Thirdly is battery performance. Now, I've actually been shooting the entire day on a single battery, and I think that's quite incredible. Now, it is the new Z-type battery, which the A7S II did not have, and I think it's a massive upgrade. Well done.
First up on the R5, it's definitely going to be autofocus. As we said earlier, it really feels like you're cheating when it comes to autofocus. There's nothing that touches this at the moment. The R5 is a winner there. In terms of memory cards, they went with the more traditional CF Express Type B, which is a more standard type card, and then stabilization. The stabilization on the Canon definitely felt a little bit smoother for me as well.
Is actually a bit of a
chromatic aberration.
So after an entire day of shooting, what is our verdict on these two cameras?
My verdict on the Canon R5 is that this is the best professional photographic camera in the world with excellent video capabilities, thus making it probably the best all-rounder there is.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. I cannot argue. Now, the A7S III is actually a little bit of an optical illusion. It looks like a mirrorless camera, but it's not. This thing is plain and simple a video camera. Sony looked at everything that people were producing with the already amazing A7S II, and they went, here you go, here's something more, here's something better in every conceivable way, and you have the A7S III. It is the best video solution for any aspiring professional videographer. This thing is phenomenal as a video camera.
Really hope to see you next time.
Cheers. Yeah, we're gonna have to redo that.
Why?
Yeah, dude, that was a weirdo.
And as always, dis son my nou op. Dis so warm.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
And consider subscribing. We actually... What?
Yeah, what do we actually do?
Dude, what?
After you subscribe. Yeah, and consider subscribing. We'll catch you guys next time.
Dude, my brain is super fried. And as always, leave some comments. Dude. Okay, serious.
Well guys, thank you very much for joining us on that comparison review of the Canon EOS R5 and Sony A7S Mark III. We really hope you guys enjoyed it.
And as always, any questions, leave them in the comments below and consider subscribing. We hope to see you next time.
Cheers guys.
Let's see, I don't care.
Yeah, I don't either now.